Amid growing concerns about household debt, insolvencies are rising at the highest rate in 3 years. Benjamin Tal, Deputy Chief Economist at CIBC, joins us with more details. Benjamin, you've put out a big report on this, and all this week we've been hearing incidental survey data, MNP, showing people are just within $200, 46% of Canadians within $200 of not being able to make ends meet. But you have official data from the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy Canada that kind of shows what the trends are. So just take us through what the data is telling us about insolvencies and potential bankruptcies.
Yes, the data is fine. You know what? Yes, it's starting to rise, but nothing to write home about. We are starting from an extremely low base. You look at consumer bankruptcies, they have been falling for the past 4, 5, 6 years. So you're starting from a very low base. So insolvencies are starting to rise. Nothing to write home about, but clearly the trend is up. Makes sense because interest rates are starting to rise. Now, the number one factor impacting insolvencies and bankruptcies is the unemployment rate, by far. And the unemployment rate is fine. But the fact that interest rates are starting to rise and that the margin impacting some people tells you that there is some vulnerability there when it comes to the risk of higher interest rates. And the Bank of Canada take this into account. In fact, the Bank of Canada is telling you maybe the disease is also the cure. Maybe the increased sensitivity to higher rates will prevent interest rates from rising to the sky. And listen, the 5-year rate is actually going down, and the Bank of Canada is tweeting about the possibility of not moving at all. So we are there already.
You know, it's interesting you said nothing to write home about, but you did write about it. And there are increasing surveys that are dialing up the rhetoric that we are heading towards dire situations. So is your message that all these anecdotal surveys are not actually bearing out in the official data that the Bank of Canada is ultimately making decisions based on?
Yes, you know what, I don't buy all those scary stories about $200 away from bankruptcy. I think it's not correct and not even responsible. I think that we have to look at the numbers and see what makes sense and what doesn't. Clearly, as a society, we are much more sensitive to the risk of higher interest rates than any previous cycle. No question about it. And that's why the Bank of Canada is so powerful now in terms of its ability to impact the economy through higher interest rates. Every basis point counts. We have a lot of people that were taking those mortgages, too large mortgages, and now they are extremely sensitive to the risk of higher interest rates. Clearly, that will happen, and that's why we're starting to see delinquencies rising, and that's very interesting. However, in order to see a major issue, you need a recession. You need the unemployment rate to go up. For this, you need to overshoot when it comes to monetary policy. You have to raise interest rates very, very quickly. The Bank of Canada, as of October of last year, they were basically telling you we are moving, and now they are not moving anymore. Basically, they learn past lessons. Every economic recession over the past 50 years was helped, if not caused, by a monetary policy error in which central banks raised interest rates way too much to kill the economy. The housing market crash in '91 in Canada was all about a monetary policy error. What Pollard is telling you, what even the Fed is telling you, we are actually paying attention to the past. We are not repeating past mistakes, and that's why both central banks are actually at basically slowing down now.
When you look at the average, you say you look at the overall trend. There's no reason to be overly concerned. You say that's being reflected in the Bank of Canada's own thinking. Regionally, though, are you seeing signs of stress? Particularly, I think about Alberta, where again, anecdotally, we hear from executives out there time and time again, and people who work there, who certainly are painting a very bleak picture.
Yes, Alberta is definitely a different cycle because Alberta is riding the wave of oil prices and the situation there is not so great. So Alberta is a totally different story, and clearly we see the unemployment rate rising there, we see delinquency rising there. So yes, I'm concerned about Alberta, even Saskatchewan and Manitoba, but clearly we are not seeing a situation for the country as a whole in which this is going to explode. Not by any stretch of the imagination, not yet. Not yet. Clearly, if interest rates go up by another 100, 150 basis points over a short period of time, then we will be tested. I think it will be recessionary because of this sensitivity to higher interest rates. The trick is interest rates, and they are not rising very, very quickly, and that's a good thing because we are reaching some sort of a soft landing, if you wish, through a very, very modest increase in interest rates. Again, I don't want to minimize the sensitivity of the consumer to higher interest rates. It's there, but clearly we have to realize that interest rates are not rising as quickly as they used to. Another very important issue is that we have been regulating this market, especially the housing market, for the past 10 years. Every 2 minutes there is a new regulation basically aimed at protecting Canadians from themselves. And the last one is B20. What it means, if you think about it for a second, that every day that passes, more and more and more Canadians are falling under this umbrella, more protective umbrella, the new regulations, which means that if we survive the next 2, 3, 4 years, and more people will enter this umbrella, the risk actually will go down, not up, in terms of the ability of consumers to deal with economic shocks.
That's interesting insight, and I don't think people have thought about it that way. I mean, I get what you're saying, that you're saying there's the risk of a hard landing on consumer leverage is very low. But when you look at things like retail sales, which were pretty lackluster in the most recent month, does that we have data, does that suggest to you that there are other perhaps, less tangible signs of consumer stress? If it's not showing up in insolvencies, it's not showing up meaningfully in bankruptcies, which, as you point out, are actually coming down. Is it just showing up in where consumers are deciding to spend their money?
Absolutely, yes. So again, we have to distinguish between two things. You're absolutely right. If you talk about a subprime type situation, delinquency is going to the sky, that's not the scenario. But clearly, higher interest rates means people are paying more to finance their debt, especially those that are stretched. And that's why you see consumer spending slowing down. So clearly it's there, and that's why we believe that the Bank of Canada will not be raising interest rates in any significant way from this point, because of the fact that the economy is slowing. Even this consumer that has been carrying this economy will slow down because of this increased sensitivity to higher rates. Absolutely right. This is happening. This is impact the cycle, but it's not a subprime type situation that we have seen in the US.
Benjamin, thanks so much for joining us.
A pleasure. Thank you.
That's Benjamin Tal, Deputy Chief Economist at CIBC.